Right, it's 9:05, so let's crack on. So, just first of all, everybody that's on the call, welcome. Thank you for attending the ESCON Solutions webinar this morning, which is actually the third one that we've run in the last few weeks. Just a couple of housekeeping points. If people can keep their microphones muted and cameras off as we run through the presentations, it just avoids sort of distractions for the people presenting, etc. There is a link in the invite for any questions that people may have as we go through the session this morning, and there will be a Q&A at the end of the session this morning. So, as I said, welcome everybody to what is undoubtedly the hottest webinar that I've ever been involved in. I hope it's cooler wherever you are sat, because my home office is literally like a fan oven at the minute, but we will make it through the day. So the seminar this morning is all about eBIS supplier management tools. On the session this morning, we're going to hear from Alice Emerson, who is one of our eBIS experts here at ESCON Solutions. And we're also going to hear from James Coulthard from one of our customers, Great Places Housing Group as well, just on that subject. So without further ado, I will pass over and we will first of all hear from Alice around the supplier management tools and the functionality that is available. So thank you very much. Enjoy the session.
So I'm Alice and I'm the eBIS and operations team lead here at ESCON. Today's webinar is going to be on the eBIS supplier management tools. So some of the things you can do in eBIS, such as creating new supplier requests, you can send them externally, internally, creating supplier modifications, and just kind of talking you through some of the things you can do within eBIS. So let me just share my screen and I will get started. So this here is just your standard eBIS menu. If any of you haven't seen this before, the eBIS menu I've created for today's session is the new supplier requests and modifications menu. So as you can see within here, I've created both one for create new supplier requests and supplier modifications. So the one I'm going to start off first with is creating new supplier requests. So eBIS is essentially your workflow engine, so you can build the workflow to work for you and your business. For example, do you need before you can create a supplier request, who does it need to go to for approvals? Do you need to get your finance teams involved, your procurement teams, etc.? And these can be completely tailored to your business. A couple ways you can create a new supplier request within eBIS is you can do one internally. So somebody physically goes in, clicks entry, and you fill in all the information on the new supplier. So you could fill in the address, the tax registration number, company registration number, etc. Or alternatively, another option you can do is you can actually send out an external supplier form to the supplier that they have to fill out. So they have to fill out all their details and then send it back to you. And from there, you can then go ahead and start approving it. So I'm just going to talk you through kind of the external supplier one, just give you a bit of an idea of what you can potentially do in eBIS. So I'm just going to click entry here and just create one. So as you can see in here, it's just my standard eBIS fields. So most of your eBIS forms are set up this way. You've got all your fields that you can fill out. Obviously, these can be completely tailored to your own requirements. So the first field here that I've got is registered name of company. So I need to put in what the company is called. I'm just going to create ESCON for just now. And name of company as appeared on invoices. So it's a slightly shortened version of the company name itself. From here, I can determine my currency, invoice currency, payment currency. Is a supplier live, for example, is it inactive? It automatically populates when it was created, so that would be today's date, the date that you've started the request. You can build in internal fields like this. So for example, description of goods and services, a reason why I'm setting up the supplier. You can add more in or you can take them out. It's entirely up to yourselves on these kinds of things. eBIS is quite flexible, that way you can really tailor it to your own business. reason. So some of you might have noticed down here that I've got these checkboxes. So one of them is saying copy to 9999. So another cool thing that you can do within eBIS is you can set up new supplier requests so that if you're a company that has multiple companies where you might be setting up the same supplier in more than one of your companies, you can actually do that using something called like the multi-company functionality. So we've designed this here ourselves. And one of the cool things you can do is if you click copy to 9999, what happens is once this supplier request has been fully approved for the company that I'm in, which is 9990, once it's been approved, it will also then create this supplier request in company 9999 as well. So that can save companies a lot of time because it means you don't have to manually set them up twice, essentially. You can just set them up the once. You can build in your own policy and procedures documents. So if I click in here, it would take me to just now the ESCON web address, but you can set it up so it takes the requesters into your own policy and procedures document to make sure that they've read them through before submitting a new supplier request. Confirm, have you read the procurement policy and procedures? I'm just going to click yes for just now. Address. The one thing about when you do need to send out the external supplier request forms like I'm doing in this example is you need to make sure that you do have an email address and it is going to go to somebody within a business. So I'm just going to populate that for just now. This just means I want to make sure that my mail merged email addresses and remittance email addresses are the same as the one that I've just put in. So for this example, I'm just going to click OK. So there's a couple of buttons up here you might have noticed. So you can, again, you can create as many buttons as you want in eBIS specifically for your business. So in this example, I've got sign for approval, save progress, which means I can save it if it's erroring out. I've got a user guide as well that you can publish so requesters know how to fill this out. Just now I'm just going to send this for approval, and what it's going to do is it's going to send an email to the supplier with a link or that they then need to fill out. So it'll look something a little bit like this. You can tailor the email again to be exactly what you want it to be, but it essentially just gives them a link that they can then use and go into to fill out all their supplier request details. So it's essentially just a form that they can fill out on the internet. So it's already automatically pulled through some of the information that I have already put in. So for example, the registered name of the company is already there, and they can change it if they need to, if you've put it in wrong, for example. So for just now, I've just put in like the standard supplier information that you would need to fill out, but this can obviously be completely tailored to your own business requirements. So for example, you might need to store extra information like, is it a safety critical supplier? Do you have policy number, limits, insurance numbers, things like that? And you can build this into this form as well. I'm just going to fill this out with some test data just now, just for this. You can build things in as well here. So you've got, are you registered in the construction and industry scheme? You can put it in so that your payment terms within, say, for example, your terms and conditions document are clearly stated on this as well. So there's no excuse for them not reading that, but it's not like it's in the fine print. It's right there in the thing that they're filling out. Bank details. Again, you can build your policies, terms and conditions documents in here. So if they click on this, it could take them into an external policy guide, things like that. There's so many things that you can do within eBIS. one of the things as well that we've built in is there's a save for later button. So if it's quite a long supplier form where they need to go back and into it, they just need to click the save for later button, and they can then reopen the link later on and complete the rest of the form if they need to. But for just now, I'm just going to click submit. And what that's done now is it's now pulled back all the information that I put into that web form now into eBIS. So it's all pulled through and populated for me. I've not had to manually create any of this. Another extra thing that you might not have noticed is we've also created something called an approval history tab within here. So this is something you can actually do within any eBIS form. It doesn't have to be this one specifically. I find that it's a lot more user-friendly way of actually seeing who's approved a request and when. Another benefit of building this in is that you can actually then put these into open accounts later on, where you can then build reports on these fields. So the approval history can actually be reportable, which is quite handy for people. I'm just going to go through the approval process now. So now that this is all come into here, I can click approve. It'll then go into my next level of approval. So in this case, it go to procurement. I've just given myself access to everything for just now for this demo, but obviously in real life, you can completely manipulate this to be your own, and you'd have your own procurement teams and things like that. With some finance. I'm just going to approve it just now. And what it's done now is it's created my supplier, and you'll notice as well, it's also created it in the other company. Yeah, you'll see it's created them here in both my companies, in 99990 and 9999. So the other half of this, you might be wondering, is how once a new supplier request has been approved, how can I actually modify it? So one thing that we'd recommend is we'd recommend building in supplier modification forms, which just allows you to update the supplier's information. So it might be an address change, it might be they've changed their tax number, something like that. And you can do that within eBIS. One of the key reasons we recommend doing it in eBIS is it means that you've got that audit trail as well, and you've got that segregation of duty. So you can check that things have been checked. You can add attachments saying why things have been checked, and things like that. You can just build in a lot more of an audit trail within eBIS. And then once it's been fully approved, it would then again update the supplier's information in open accounts. So you can build these internally, so somebody's manually changing the information in eBIS and then passing it through, or in this example, I'm going to show you where you can do it so you're passing it back onto the supplier again. So you can start off the supplier modification form. I'm just going to find the one that I've just created. Give a reason as to why you're changing it. Again, you can pick which company you actually want to create this modification in. So you can do it so it's just in this one company, or so it's in both, for example. Just need to put in my email, which is already populated based on what I'd put in before. And it generates that HTML link again. So in here, it's pulled back all the information that was already inputted, and then all the supplier would have to do is change the information that they need to. So in this case, I'm just going to change these slightly. And again, they can go through, check all their information, make sure it is all correct so they can change other things if they need to. And then that pulls back into eBIS. and it highlights as well the changes that have been made, so you can quite clearly see from your side what has been changed. So they're all in red here. And then you can just go through your approval process again, and then it would update the supplier's information in Open Accounts. So that's just a bit, it's just a very condensed view of what you can do in eBIS. You can obviously do so much more. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you've got, or if you have anything specific to your companies that you want to know a bit more about, just let me know. There's a Q&A at the end, so just put all your questions in now. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Alice. Excellent overview, obviously, of not absolutely everything that eBIS can do, but I think that's a good overview of what the supply management tools, sort of functionality gives. So what we're now going to do is pass over to James Coulthard from Great Places Housing Group. And James is just going to talk briefly about how they've implemented, some of that functionality, the benefits that they've gained from it, but also I believe he's going to touch on how Escon have supported them in being able to then maintain and manage that moving forward within the system. So, James, over to you.
Thank you, Vince. Yeah, so before we had eBIS, we had quite a manual new supplier process or supply modification process. It was very paper-based, lots of handoffs between different teams. So our accounts payable officers would manually start by filling in the supplier details on a form, either electronically or really old-fashioned, completely paper-based, and we'd pass that backwards and forwards between our procurement team, between our business contacts before we got completed, and finally return to the accounts payable team, where they would enter the details into the supplier maintenance screen on Open Accounts. And there's obviously quite a lot of risk in that process in terms of forms getting lost, people filling in the details incorrectly, any risk of fraud arising there from collusion with suppliers. So we knew we had to do something, and it was flagged by our auditors that we needed to look at it. So we moved over to eBIS, and that's when we started engaging with Escon, and we were able to workflow this process in eBIS in a really similar way to what Alice has just shown you. To be honest, it's almost a carbon copy of our form. It's allowed us to collect quite a lot more data on suppliers than we used to, because we were manually calling people up and getting details from them or emailing them across. The eBIS form allowed us to specify what fields of data we required, so we can ensure that we've got all the insurance policies and things we need. We can get them to attach documents, so we know it just reduces some of the risk that we have in terms of knowing that all our suppliers are correctly insured and they've got all the proper documentation that we need. It puts some of the onus back onto the suppliers for providing that information as well. And even in terms of things like their bank details and contact addresses and stuff, you're relying on a supplier to enter those themselves. So it means that the accounts payable officers in your team aren't going to be responsible for erroneously entering the wrong number on a bank account and sending the money to someone and getting chased to say, where's my money for the work that we've done for you. It has, as Alice mentioned, it's given us that segregation of duties that we needed. So no one in our finance team now has access to the supply maintenance screen, apart from our finance systems team for support purposes. But no operational finance colleagues have access to that. So no one is able to go in and amend details, amend bank details, amend addresses, amend contacts. That's all controlled directly through eBIS, and no one can do it directly in Open Accounts at all anymore. So we have all of our new suppliers and all of our supplier modifications all go through eBIS now. Took us a while to get there. I think the little bits like the copy function that Alice referred to has been really useful for us in terms of it helped us to align our purchase ledger. We've got about 5 or 6 main companies set up on Open Accounts, and we found that we had purchase ledgers with various suppliers on. Some would have the same supplier twice, but with different bank details in each company that we held, or different address in each company that we held. We did an exercise to clean all those up, and now everything is controlled through there. We update them all at the same time through eBIS, and it gives us a lot more confidence in that data that we're holding. Escon have been, once we have the supplier form, we have continued to work on it. So we didn't have the copy to company function at first. That's something we've recently added. but Escon have been really good in terms of if we do need to make a little change to the form, if we want to change the wording on something, if we just want to add in one new question, they've provided us the documentation and training that we need to be able to go in and make those adjustments ourselves, whether it to be to the new supplier form or to any of our other forms really that we worked with them on. If it's something a little bit more complicated, so if we're amending like a HTML form, or when we did add in the copy to complete functionality, and I've just spotted a little resend button on the form that Alice displayed there, which I thought looked quite good, which we don't have yet. But anything more complicated like that, we go back to Escon, and they'll help us build those into the form, and they'll build it into our test environment, send us out some testing scripts, allow us to go through and test all those changes, and then before we push them out into live, which we usually do out of hours. So overall, it's took the item of a risk off our audit reports, and we're a lot more confident in the supplier data that we hold, and our finance directors are a lot happier with the controls we've got around the accounts payable process. So yeah, it's been a really quite easy and quite quick win for us to implement. So we've been really happy with it. But again, as with Alice, I'll be sticking around for a little bit now. If anyone's got any questions for me, just shout up.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, James. Great overview in terms of you know the benefit from from a customer point of view in terms of using that functionality within eBIS. So as both Alice and James have mentioned, there is all sorts of functionality available. We've shown some of it this morning. There is undoubtedly lots more that the solution can do. So if anybody on the call wants additional information around what functionality can be built in, please make contact, and we will happily have those conversations with you. In terms of questions, we've had a few questions through, so I'll endeavour to cover a few of them, and then what we will do, the same as we've done previously, is any additional questions, we will put together a full Q&A document, which we will provide out to everybody who's on the call this morning, so that you've got answers to all of the questions that have been submitted. But if I start with this one, so a question that's come in: if a supplier is changing bank account details, can the workflow for this be different than other modifications, and can mandatory documentation be added for checking the requirements?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So one thing that you can do, particularly with your supplier modification form, is you can set up different reasons as to why it's being modified. So for example, if it's marked as it's needing your bank detail changed, there'll be more steps within the approval workflow process. You could add in an extra finance check, or you need mandatory attachments that you can then upload. As opposed to if you were doing potentially an address change, and where it may just need to go to the procurement team for an extra set of eyes or something along those lines. You can build in different workflows for what the modification actually is. And you can add mandatory attachments to any eBIS form where you need to. It's entirely up to yourselves, and you can base it on certain requirements as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. What permissions or /licenses do employees need to be able to set up new supplier requests and modifications within the system?
Yeah, so to set up new suppliers and modifications, you need an eFinance accounts payable license, and that gives you access to do all of that. Quite often supplier invoices need that license as well, so if users use that, it just means that they're using the same license. You don't need to purchase more as well.
Okay, all right. And again, I'm assuming that's something that we can provide advice on in terms of making sure that organisations are maximising the licensing that they're available.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we can help organisations to do as well is produce reports, so they can see what eBIS users are in the system and using set licenses, and then they can go through as well. And sometimes they'll notice people have actually left the business, or they don't really log in at all, so they can probably give up their license and give it to somebody else that would utilise it.
Brilliant. Okay, that's really good. Thank you. Another question: if the supplier doesn't complete the external supplier form, will they then be sent reminders automatically from the system? And if so, how frequently, or is that up to the to the organisation?
Yeah, so you can set up approval reminders at any stage of the form. So it can be to the supplier or to your procurement teams or finance teams or whoever's approving, and you can determine it based on however many days you want to send the reminder for. You can base it on whether it's based on the working days or if it's just based on normal days as well. And you can set up like workday calendars. So for example, I don't want to take into account Saturday, Sundays or bank holidays and things like that, but you can set the reminders to whatever time you need it to be.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to cover one more question that we had submitted via the link, and then I think there's a couple of questions that have been added into the chat. So I'm going to ask Ewan to potentially jump in and just ask a couple of those questions. So one more that's been submitted: can the eBIS menu be manipulated to show only the stages that the user has access to?
Yeah, so you would set up profiles when you're creating these new supplier request forms. So for example, if you give somebody a new supplier request or profile, say in eBIS, then you would assume they maybe only have access to requests, see completed ones and rejected ones. And then as opposed to on my menu where you've seen absolutely everything, they would just see those items. So just the entry, rejected and completed sections.
Okay, all right, excellent. Right, just very quickly, before I just pass over to you, and he's just going to cover a couple of the questions. There was something else put in the chat regarding eBIS supplier inquiries, supplier dispute forms, etc., etc. There's various things in there that someone's asked if we can potentially cover. We're not going to have time to cover those items this morning, but thank you for putting that in, because that's probably a fantastic subject that we can cover in a future webinar. So leave that with us, and we will come back on those items with some information following today, but we may well run a specific session on those on those subjects. But Ewan, is there a couple of other questions that we've maybe got time to cover that are in the chat?
Yeah, so Alice, I feel like these will be potentially for yourself. So firstly, we've been asked, can you set automated emails to request updated insurance certificates on expiry, as an example?
I don't think you can set them so they come up straight from eBIS, but you can build reports to kind of highlight which ones have expired, and then from there almost maybe create like a mail merge in where you're sending out the questions to the suppliers. We could look into seeing if you could do it from eBIS, but I'm not sure off the top of my head that you can, but it's definitely something we can look into.
Sure thing. And then finally, we've been asked just finally, is it possible to set up analysis codes against suppliers during setup to allow suppliers to be categorized in a hierarchy format?
Yeah, it is. So you can build in analysis codes against your suppliers, which you can then pull through to your supplier forms as well. And you can make them mandatory as well, so people have to fill them in. Yeah, that's absolutely not a problem. And you can set it up so they can modify them on the modification form as well if you want as well. Obviously that would be more of like an internal action that would probably have to be done if you were going to do it externally. But yeah, you can definitely build them in.
Perfect. Vince, I think you're muted.
Some people would say that's a good thing. Including my wife, but there you go. So thank you for that, Ewan, for jumping in, asking those questions. I think everybody would agree that that session's been really useful this morning. Thank you for the interaction from the people that have attended in terms of submitting questions. There are some additional questions that we've not had time to cover, but as I say, we will put together a full Q&A document that we will issue out. We will also look at the additional subjects that have been suggested in the chat, and hopefully run a further webinar on those subjects in the coming weeks. But that just leaves me to say thank you very much to everybody who's attended this morning. Thank you to Alice and James for presenting this morning, very much appreciated. Thank you to Ewan for jumping in when he wasn't expecting to ask a couple of questions. As I've said before, please do contact us if you've got any additional questions. If there is anything that you think of after the session this morning, feel free to drop any further information into the chat from the meeting or an email across to either myself or Ewan, and we will, we'll pick that up and follow up. But other than that, as I say, thank you very much for attending. please stay safe, stay hydrated. That's what I'm trying to do today, because it's unbelievably warm. And have a great day, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.